Hello friends, it's Dan. Welcome back. I have a quick one here because I know I've got a lot of reviews to get done for you here, and every minute I spend doing stuff like this is one less minute I am reviewing. However, I discovered something in experimenting with these speed paints that I picked up about a month ago. I've only used them so far on the Ogre project, which you would have seen if you've watched my previous Let's Paint video, and I thought it was reasonably successful in that video, but I've done some additional experimenting with it and wasn't really happy with the results that I was getting, and I was trying to figure out why. I want to be really clear, like, I'm not a painting channel, this is a review channel, and I also happen to paint from time to time. Like, I've watched probably, I would say, like, in total, like, 4 hours worth of Slapchop painting tutorials over the last, like, week and a half as I was trying to, like, wrestle with this issue. And at the end of it, I discovered that, like, I really didn't know anything more than I already knew at the outset, because, like, all I'm doing here, again, this one was painted entirely with speed paints with the exception of, like, the metallics, and all I did was basically dry brush up from white. I, in this case, primed it white, darkened it down, and then brought it back up with white dry brushing, and then applied the speed paints, which is in contrast to my old painting method, which is what I had been calling razzle dazzle. It's just glorified, like, dip, essentially, where I would do a layer of the base colors, dry brush up to, like, pure white in some instances, and then give it a really heavy wash of brown all over it. So the results were always, it's kind of like a gritty effect. So you can see the contrast here side by side. It's a very different, I think, end result in terms of especially, like, brightness of the model. So I like this result a lot better, but as I was just saying, like, when I was transferring it onto other figures that maybe didn't have as many or had more flat surfaces, let's put it that way, I was finding an issue with the method I used for the ogres. Like, here's a good example of a medieval knight that I painted with the exact same method. In fact, in this case, I did, like, the proper Slapchop methodology, which was black primer and then dry brushed all the way up to white. But you see here, like, how blotchy it is. And again, this is just a layer of contrast or speed paints. I used some contrast paints on some of the figures I was testing out, but it was the same issue, which is, you can see, like, that's just raw primer coming through underneath. And part of it's because I'm using a brush instead of, like, a airbrush, right? Because I don't have an airbrush. But I think the problem is still the same, which is that you've just got raw primer coming through on some of these figures. And so it occurred to me, like, if I have this as my old painting style, which was to base coat in acrylics, almost like, again, imagine the Army Painter dip style, and I got this in which I'm layering on speed paints over a bright undercoat, why not, like, combine the two? I'm going to base coat in some bright acrylic colors as though I'm going to dip it, dry brush up to white just like I would on this figure, but then instead of just dipping it or using just a brown wash over the whole thing, then use speed paints. I think it's going to take basically the same amount of time as it would for either of these figures, but I think the end result might look pretty cool. So let me cut here to some footage of me going through and doing that. So I've cut ahead here in the process a little bit because I did a little bit of work and wasn't sure I was even going to make a video out of this. So I've already done some base layering, so you can see on that guy's uniform there I have, like, a tan and very light gray kind of split livery for what will ultimately be yellow, like a bright yellow and dark gray or almost black color. So I've blocked that out, and then on the peasant guy I've blocked out just like a greenish tan, because I'm going to make that a green color, like a green tunic color. Just picked two random models because I was tired of ruining nights testing all this stuff out. I just wanted to see if I could make it work, because the way I came up with this was not just, blend together my two painting styles. It was actually from watching this hours of footage that the only Slapchop videos that I was, like, compelled by were the ones that did, like, the double Slapchop method, because otherwise, like, I never really saw, like, a single video where it was Slapchop where if the paint, and credit to these guys, like, these guys that run these, like, big painting channels, I don't know how they do it. They do some incredible work, but the only ones I saw that I was like, that looks really good, is if they then went on to, like, layer highlight after the layer of Slapchop or just contrast paint. And listen, your boy does not have time to do that. I'm trying to make this fast. So really, again, the double Slapchop, where you put a layer of Slapchop down and then basically Slapchop over that, were the only ones that I was convinced by. So I thought, well, like, why fiddle around with that much contrast paint? Let's just essentially, like, prep the models like we're going to dip them, use a layer of like acrylic paint as the base, and then dry brush over that, and then use your speed paint. So that's all I'm doing here. Like from here on out, this is functionally just slab chop. I'm just doing it over that base acrylic layer instead of just raw primer. And so here you could do this too if you want. I like doing a little bit of edge highlighting or like these dot highlights. I'm a little more aggressive here than I would like with my razzle dazzle technique, which was more like pin pricks. But here, because the paint that I'm going to use on top of it is not just brown like a Devlin Mud or an Agrax, it's actually like pigmented for the color that I'm using. I thought I could be a little more aggressive. And here, this is, I think it's Malignant Green from the Speed Paint range. So at this point, I'm just using contrast paint, and that'll be it. And even here, like I cut out all of my voiceover because I knew I was going to do this second voiceover as I was filming. But I think as I was putting that green layer down, I said out loud, like, oh, yep, that's exactly what I was looking for. And you can see here too, like the yellow there is much richer than what we saw on that other medieval knight figure that I was using. So I think that's the truth, is that these contrast paints, these speed paints, are just so thinned down because they have to be. Like half of it is matte, medium, and flow enhancer, just in order for them to work, that it really just leaves too much of the underlying colors showing through, which is, I think, good in this case, because if it's a base pigmented color, like with an acrylic paint, that's what's showing through and kind of enhancing the speed paint or the contrast paint layer. Whereas what I was doing before was just, again, primer showing through, ranging from black to white, depending on the primer that I was using. So, and you can see here too that I can use the same speed paint over different colors, and it actually has a subtly different effect. Like I was using that bone color on, I think I used it on the beard, I used it here on the staff. Anyway, it works great. And then, yeah, here's the end result. So you can see, I'm not saying that this is the greatest paint job that anyone has ever seen, but I think this is much better. And again, this is the exact same methodology as what I did on the Knight. The only difference is I used a base layer of acrylic paint instead of just raw primer. And I would venture to say, like, the main difference between them not only is just like the brightness of it, but again, you can see how much smoother the flat areas are, and that's because it's not just raw primer showing through. Even if that primer is white or gray, it is a pigmented color from the acrylic paint layer. And I think in this case, the only thing I would do from here is just hit him with a coat of matte varnish and then paint the eyes. But I think, again, let me just bring this in one more time just to show you the difference between the two. Again, the methodology was functionally the same. The only difference is I base coated with acrylic paints here, and I just used primer on this one. So I would almost venture to say that I think this is how you're supposed to use contrast paints. It's just maybe not as marketable to say, instead of just, prime and then hit them with a coat of contrast paint, you have to instead, or you should instead, give it a bright undercoat of an acrylic paint color, because it's just going to lead to a much smoother finish, because the pre-pigmenting that's happening from the acrylic paint layer is, I think, enhancing the contrast paint layer, and allows you to do some cool stuff that we already know from like using different primer colors and then using contrast paint on top of it. You can do the same thing here, but using your existing acrylic paints, which is, right, if I'm like painting yellow like I did here, instead of using a like tan base, I could use like a purple base, like a light lavender color, would allow you to do some like fun stuff with your lowlights. So if you've got the time, like, and if you're not as, like me, if maybe you're not thrilled with the finish on some of your contrast painted models, especially if you have been gravitating toward like fast styles like a slap chop, something like that, I might recommend you give this a go. Like, give it a base coat of a bright acrylic color of some kind, and frankly, it could even be like tan over the whole figure if you want, but I do recommend kind of leaning toward a gradient of whatever color you're probably going to use for your speed paint layer or your contrast layer, and then use your contrast paint on top of that. You can even ignore all the dry brushing and like dot highlighting that I did here. Again, I think it's just going to lead to a much smoother finish, as you see here, versus, again, this Knight, which has a kind of grainier finish to the end result. Anyway, food for thought. Give it a whirl if you like. As I said, I got lots more review content to come, so stay tuned for all that. Appreciate you all. Until next time, happy gaming.